Na fo, mae yn 2:00 felly.
Okay, it's 2 p.m. So we'll make a start. So first of all, can I welcome you all to the meeting of the Standards Committee. And I need to make a statement. So if you don't mind, good afternoon and welcome to the virtual meeting of the Isle of Anglesey Standards Committee. I'd like to remind everybody present at the meeting that the meeting will be held virtually and live streamed on YouTube and will be available for repeated viewing. You're asked to turn off your mobile phones and also to put yourself on mute unless you're contributing, because the meeting is being recorded. You're also asked to raise your virtual hand if you wish to contribute or ask a question, and then to pull it down after you've contributed. Because we're all on one screen, we might not have to use our virtual hands every time. So I do have 3 apologies before taking the roll call. So there's an apology from Mrs. Jill Murgatroyd, Mr. Iorwerth Roberts and Mrs. Celyn Edwards. Iorwerth and Celyn are unwell, so we wish them a speedy recovery. So I take it that I have to ask you to confirm that you're present. So I'll start with Dr. Thomas Rhys Davies. Good afternoon, I'm present. Mrs. Sharon Warnes, present. Counsellor John Arwell Roberts. Counsellor David Hughes Thomas. Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. Keith Roberts. He was here earlier. And can I ask the officers to introduce themselves as well? Lynn Ball, Monitoring Officer. Miriam Williams, HR Development Manager. Good afternoon. Hugh Jones, Head of Democratic Services. Good afternoon. Mared Yaxley, Solicitor. Shirley Cook, Committee Officer. Sherry Duffy, Training Officer.
Sorry, John. Keith Roberts, member of the Standards Committee.
Thank you all. So the first item on the agenda is declaration of interest. Does any member or officer have any declarations of interest regarding any item of business? If not, we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of December 2020. So I'll go through them for accuracy and I'll be asking you to confirm them. So page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, and page 10. Is anybody willing to propose that they're correct? Yes, I'm happy to propose John Arwell Roberts. Rhys, you're on mute. There's a note here from Jill Murgatroyd, who's absent today. But she did want to raise something in the minutes. She can't see what's happened to item 3 in terms of the action log for member development.
rhan o'r papura, da ni wedi cael...
As part of the papers, we have received the action log for the Standards Committee and appendices. So exactly what point was she talking about? What she says is point 3, and I'll read it out in English.
Can't see the actions from item 3, brackets member developments on the action log.
Os na rhywun eisiau cymryd y pwynt yna?
Does anybody want to respond to that point? Yes, I'm happy to respond, Mr. Chairman. First of all, the decisions here. We have a report, which is the next item on the agenda from HR, the training section, and with the last resolution concerning risk management and training for members. Well, that has been included in the response given to the committee confirming that that action has been completed, and that was done in February on the 18th. So the matters are either on the agenda or they've been actioned. Thank you. So are you happy with the minutes and the action points we've received? Thank you. So we'll go on to item 3. Member development, report by the training manager. Miriam, over to you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invitation once again today. I hope everybody's okay. Cherie is also here. She's a development officer, so please correct me or add anything as you wish, Cherie. Not much has happened since our last meeting, to be honest, but we have been busy gathering training needs. We've been talking to heads of service and the senior leadership team, group leaders and the Democratic Committee to gather development needs, as has already been noted. Not much training has been provided, and it has been limited to using the learning pool for some training sessions. Speaking to the members I've just mentioned, we did ask, what do we need to include in the scheme for next year or the plan for next year? And we provided the report, and the proposal given to them was to focus on mandatory information and training, iPad training, legislative and legal matters, and using briefing sessions to highlight some points that need to be acted upon. For example, we have sessions coming up on cyber security using videos. So we're using ITC increasingly now to provide a training. We also have modules on Learning Pool so that individuals can access them. And in the report, in Appendix 1, I've included the mandatory modules. I've highlighted those. And Learning Pool is being developed. It's being developed on a daily basis. We're adding new resources. So it's up to individuals to go into the system to see what's there for them. There have also been developments in terms of an e-learning platform, a national platform across Wales. And there are discussions with the Welsh Government to see if they're going to continue with the NHS platform as something separate. But as a council, we've adopted the Learning Pool platform. And I don't know if the Welsh Government will move to different providers rather than the health platform. The modules on the health platform will be transferred to Learning Pool so that there's a bigger choice of resources for elected members. And that's all I have for you today. The sessions that will be arranged as required, and members will be given sufficient notice. We have sessions coming up soon looking at dealing with complaints. We'll also have sessions on licensing for members of the Planning and Licensing Committee, and we have other things in the pipeline as well. But I don't have anything further to share. Have I left anything out, Shari? No, I don't think so. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes, Sharon, you raised your hand. Thank you. Thank you, Miriam, for the report. I just want to be clear so that I understand correctly. In Appendix 1, the ones that have been highlighted are all mandatory. Well, there's an M in brackets after them. That shows that they're mandatory. So there are 7 mandatory courses. Yes, on Learning Pool. Those are the same sorts of modules that staff have to complete as well. So, are there other mandatory courses that haven't been included in Learning Pool? Sessions like health and safety is mandatory. Traditionally, we've been providing these sessions face-to-face in a classroom setting. Sessions were held not last year, but the year before, and they're included in the plan as well. And bearing in mind that we're a standards committee, would standards be mandatory? You know, possibly there'll be new members in the near future. Would that be mandatory? Perhaps I should be asking Lynn that, or Marad. Yes, I'm happy to answer. Yes, training on the code is mandatory for all members. And that is included in the code that we had adapted to include that requirement. And this will be part of the induction when the new elected members take up their posts in May next year. We have 2 new members who were elected in May this year, and Marad and I have booked one-to-one sessions with them to go through the code. Bearing in mind that you will have new members, what about the council's budget? Because council budgets are complex or complicated, aren't they? I'd imagine that every member needs a general understanding of how the budget is drawn up and so on. Would that be mandatory? It isn't mandatory, and we haven't adapted the code to include that, only training on the code and on planning matters or licensing if the councillors are members of those committees. But as part of the induction, members are offered training on how the council's finances work. And that is usually provided soon after the election. Are you happy with that, Sharon? David, do you have a question? I'm sorry. I just want to praise Mark Jones. He's very good at explaining very complicated financial matters, and I think we should use his expertise as part of that training. Certainly, there will be 5 new members next year. You know, I've heard that a number of councillors won't be standing for re-election, and we'll have the 5 additional members. So there'll be a lot of training that will have to be provided. And that's all really. I have heard it mentioned that we won't have iPads in the new council, we'll be going back to laptops. So I think we need to bear that in mind as well as part of the training programme. Rhys, you had your hand up. Yes, in terms of the quality of the training, Miriam, you referred in your report that you will be transferring from the health platform. I know it isn't your area, but town and community councils, we did have a review of town and community councils because these councils will have to undertake training in future as well. Do you have any comments about the training that town and community councils can access? I'm not sure because I'm not involved with town and community council training. But when we have been providing training for them, we've been using One Voice Wales, and they are recognised as the experts in this area. But I haven't had much contact, much involvement with them recently. I think the Code of Conduct training was the last one, Lynn. Yes, quite a few members of town and community councils did attend the Code of Conduct training a number of years ago now. Mr. Chair, if I may respond, usually after an election, so after May next year, on behalf of the Standards Committee, as part of our statutory duty, we will be offering the town and community councils training sessions, but usually, due to capacity and so on, we do use One Voice Wales, and they've done a good job, I think. We've had a very positive feedback about their courses. So I anticipate that we'd use the same model again. So I take it, David and Miriam, your hands are still up. So I take it that you don't have any further questions. I just wanted to make a comment about the induction programme for next year. As was mentioned about having a session on the budget, usually and historically what we do during the induction programme is to arrange for the directors and senior officers and heads of service to come in to give an overview of what's happening within their services, who are the key officers that members should be aware of, and just to give them an overview of their priorities and strategies within those services. So I imagine that that will be included in the plan for next year. Thank you, Miriam. Keith? You're on mute, I think.
I'll get used to this button eventually.
Well, my ear is getting sore, Keith.
It was just that's just going just to confirm what Rhys was asking there with the town and community. There is a full selection of. I've just been through quite a few of them. What's available with the new conduct that's coming up next year. So yes, One Voice Wales is the main provider for the town and community councils, and those that are not on board already, I think will have to come on board to gain that knowledge that doesn't come through the authority. Just to confirm that.
Thank you, Keith. Os na unrhyw gwestiwn arall I Miriam?
Any other questions for Miriam? Yes, Mr. Chair, just to confirm, in terms of preparing for the new council, naturally, there will be a percentage of new members in the council next time, and there will be 5 additional members. So we will be preparing a combination of briefing sessions from senior officers and specific training. And the programme will be arranged over the next few months, focusing on providing support and information to members during the first 2 or 3 months after the election. Will the Standards Committee have any input? Will we be able to see the programme, Hugh? Is that appropriate? We're working with Lynn, and of course we could bring the draft programme to you when it's ready. One of the lessons we've learned from the past is not to overload the members at the beginning. You know, there's a lot to take in. There could be regional sessions and perhaps virtual sessions from the WLGA next time. So it'll focus on key things, but there'll be a programme going forward beyond the first 2 or 3 months as well. That will provide the key information to members to accomplish their roles. Thank you for that too. Anything else? If not, can I thank Miriam for her presentation, and I'm looking forward to working with her in future. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye. Okay, the next item, member-related issues, and this is reports from the Head of Democratic Services. Over to you, Hugh. So there's a request from the Chair for me to give you some background about the annual report, and you'll see in the report that I've just referred to the requirements in terms of preparing annual reports, and the requirements is on local authorities to put arrangements in place to facilitate members to prepare annual reports. You know, it isn't compulsory for members to prepare annual reports, but we should make arrangements in the background to allow this to happen. Since 2013, you can see how many reports have been completed. Of course, we also update information on our website, and at the moment, we are making plans to upload the reports that we've received to date. Up to today, we've received 13 reports, 13 draft reports from members, and we've also been reminding members that they need to prepare these reports. In my opinion, it's important information in terms of local accountability to reflect the important work undertaken by members at a community level and on behalf of the constituents. So I think it's important to explain the members' work during the year. I'm also aware that the Chair of the Standards Committee has attended the group leaders meeting in the past and has highlighted the importance of preparing these reports. So that's the current situation in terms of the annual reports. And then there's some additional information in 1.2, which refers to the work happening at a national level by the WLGA to prepare role descriptions for members, and also the competency framework, which is in place by the WLGA and has been published since April. There's a link in the paper, and this sets a framework for helping members to review and to identify development needs. Of course, we will be looking at the role descriptions for members, and we'll be adapting them to be used locally, and we will be reporting on relevant issues to the Democratic Services Committee during the year. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Hugh. Does any member have any questions on the paper? John Arwell Roberts. Yes, thank you, Chair. As Hugh said, no one can force the members to write the annual report, and it is a mandatory. I propose that we accept the report, until the WLGA or somebody else makes it mandatory. We can only accept it. Thank you. Thank you, John Arwell. Does anybody else have any comments? Please. Yes, the only comment I'd like to make is I was in the meeting with John with group leaders, and there was no objection to these reports being written. Just to respond to Hugh, we're very aware of the situation, and I'm grateful to Hugh for the report. It's important that he gives us the background, and we do kindly ask the members for these reports, and we think it is good practice. And I understand what John Arwell Roberts is saying, that they aren't mandatory. David Thomas. Yes, just quickly. I don't understand why anyone wouldn't want to write an annual report. It's an opportunity for us to tell people exactly what we've been doing and how much work we've done during the year. So I don't understand why anybody would object to doing that, but that's my opinion anyway. Lynn, you've got your hand up. Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to say, as you're aware, there's a meeting later on this month between the chairs of National Standards Committee and monitoring officers with the individual who's had the job of looking at the Code of Conduct. And as Standards Committee and officers who support you will be having a meeting before that to discuss the response of the Standards Committee to Richard Penn in this context. One thing that might come out of this is changing the Code of Conduct to make some things necessary that don't have to be done. As monitoring officers, we share information about how we have adapted our local codes of conduct and the differences between different areas. And perhaps the Standards Committee could make a request to add the annual report to the code as a statutory requirement. So that's something for you to consider and perhaps have a discussion about that in the unofficial meeting we'll be having. So something for you to consider. Arwell? Yes, thank you. I accept what Lynn says, but we're discussing item 4, member-related issues. I just propose that we note the report and move on. Okay, so you've heard what John Arwell has to say. Are we ready to note the report? And perhaps in due course we can be informed exactly how many members complete the reports. Any other matters? Thank you. Thank you to Hugh as well for the presentation. Okay, item number 5, conduct complaints to the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales. So the Director of Function, Council Business. Thank you. Yes, I'm pleased to report that there's not much substance in this report. You'll see that it looks at the period of 6 months up to the end of March this year. And the report confirms in enclosure 1 and enclosure 3 that no complaints were received about elected members of the County Council during those 6 months. During the same period, 1 complaint was received about a town councillor And then during the last 3 months, that has been rejected. So there are no live cases within those 6 months, and there was just one during that time frame. Just to update you, this will be reported to you officially in the next report in July. But there are 3 further complaints that have been received in the meantime after March, and these are complaints against members of community councils, and all of them have been rejected by the Ombudsman as well. So that's the most up-to-date information, but those will be reported officially to you in due course. Thank you. Arwel. I'm sorry, I just forgot to take my hand down. So I'm sure we note the report, and thank you to Lynn for that. Okay, item number 6. Decisions by the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales. Yes, thank you. Yes, in this report, we have the complaints that have been submitted to the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales concerning county councils and community councils, and they cover a year of complaints received by the Ombudsman, which is investigated. I think there are 13 cases. I don't intend to go through them all, but I've just drawn out 1 or 2 that I thought were of interest, and included some points that we need to remind members about. So in the appendix, the second case, Pembrey and Bury Port, this wasn't referred to the Standards Committee, but the reason was that the member in question had accepted blame early on and had apologised to the complainant, and that has had an effect on the Ombudsman's decision. So if that is possible, of course it depends on the context, but it's worth reminding members about that. With the third case, St Donat's Community Council, this was a personal and prejudicial interest concerning appointing an elected member to a community council. It was a co-option. It was also decided by the Ombudsman that no further action needed to be taken, and because it was the appointment of a member and not a staff member, I think if there had been a financial interest, the decision would have been different. But it was also important that the member had accepted and followed incorrect advice from the clerk of the community council, and also that the appointment was unanimous. So if the member had declared an interest and left the meeting, the decision would have been the same anyway. So the Ombudsman's recommendation was training for the clerk of the community council. In the context of our community councils on Anglesey, the Standards Committee has always raised this with town and community councils, and has even sent them the links that Councillor Keith Roberts was talking about to One Voice Wales and what they can provide as training. And we have recommended to them that they look at including the cost of that sort of training to their precept. So perhaps in the context of this report, you might want to ask us to report once again to the town and community councils and to remind them of the need and the importance of doing that. With item 6, okay, 6, this is Llantwit Bardre Community Council, and obviously this is a situation that a number of areas has experienced, which is a clash amongst members of a community council or a town council, and the Ombudsman decided in this case not to take any further steps because intervention had been provided by the chair of the local standards committee and the monitoring officer concerning things that had happened following this complaint. So I think that is something that we could consider as well, looking at the local resolution protocol in future. Exactly what is the role of the standards committee in this sort of situation? Obviously, it did make a difference in this case. And then case 10, just to remind you that an elected member can make a complaint to the Ombudsman, which is a self-referral, because they think or they are accused of breaching the code and they want to bring the issue to the attention of the Ombudsman. That is possible, and sometimes the Ombudsman is willing to look at these cases, but a member can gain some sort of peace of mind if they have referred the issue, and then if the Ombudsman rejects it, you know, that's helpful. It's something useful for you to be aware of. And then items 11 and 12, these concern county councils. One of them, Denbighshire. From what we understand from the monitoring officer in Denbighshire, the hearing was due to take place last Friday, and we're awaiting the outcome of that hearing. So I'll be pursuing that and I'll report back to you, and I'll include it in the information that we share with elected members and the town and community councils. And then item 11, we've just had an update from the monitoring officer in Bridgend. So we'll be analysing that and then we'll share it with you separately outside the meeting. And then item 13, this was referred by the Ombudsman to the Adjudication Panel for Wales because the Ombudsman felt that it was serious enough. And that has been included in your papers for item 7. And Mared will be talking to you about that when we reach the next item. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Please. Yes, going back to case 3, Lynn. I think it's important, and you did mention that members shouldn't rely on this case as a way of defending, as a defence. It's important to remind members that the clerks don't carry the can. You know, it's the responsibility of the member themselves to declare their interests. Yes, thank you, Rhys. May I come back on behalf of Jill? She's got a note asking about points 9, 10, 11, 12 and 13. There were no learning points noted for those cases. So no learning points identified for the final cases. So any learning points in the information that we've received? For a number of these, not a lot of information is published by the Ombudsman, so it's not easy every time to work out the reasoning. So what we've done, we've gone through what's been published and we've drawn out the main points. And if there aren't any learning points, well, you know, we couldn't identify them. And also it's a matter of keeping things simple, you know, key points for members. You know, if we give members 13 cases with a number of learning points, you know, no one will remember everything and they won't have an interest. But if we just raise 4 or 5 key issues, you know, members will take more notice of them and they'll have a greater effect, I think. Thank you. Anything else on that matter? So we note the report. Okay, item 7, decisions by the Adjudication Panel for Wales. Thank you. This is a report that we bring to you as a committee to update you on the cases that have been heard by the Adjudication Panel for Wales since your last formal meeting. There are 2 cases to report this time. So if I take you to the first case, I won't repeat the report in full. I'll just draw out the main points. The first case was the one that Lynn was referring to previously. This was included in the previous item as well, about a county councillor who had breached the code of conduct because he had posted messages including strong opinions and swearing and so on about politicians on social media. I think you might remember that complaints about social media is something we're hearing more and more about. That was the original allegation and the first complaint submitted to the Ombudsman. But whilst undertaking the investigation to that complaint, a second allegation was made about this councillor as well, that he wasn't cooperating with the Ombudsman investigation, and there is a requirement in the code to work with the monitoring officer and the Ombudsman when an investigation is being undertaken. And the decision of the Adjudication Panel for Wales was, although that member had posted those messages on his Facebook page in a personal capacity, and that, you know, he was free to have a political opinion, but they decided that the messages went too far to be tolerated in a democratic society, and you need some sort of boundaries in terms of political expression. So that it's interesting for members to be aware of that. And then the second allegation, the Adjudication Panel for Wales found that the member didn't cooperate with the Ombudsman and that he had been deliberately avoiding the Ombudsman's request to move things forward. And that member was disqualified for 15 months, which is quite a significant sanction, and shows you how the Adjudication Panel considered the content of those messages. So if I draw your attention to the learning points in enclosure 1 for that case, as I mentioned, the social media are a key part of everybody's lives, including councillors, and the guidance has been developed by the WLGA and it has been shared previously with members, but it might be a good idea to draw attention to this guidance amongst members following on from this case, just to highlight, yes, social media can be beneficial, but they have to be careful when using it as well. The other learning point noted is the Adjudication Panel considered the Ombudsman guidance on the Code of Conduct. There's another item on the agenda looking at that, so we might be able to link both things together to draw their attention to the new guidance. And this case shows you that the Ombudsman can add further allegations during his investigation, for example, this one, the breach of paragraph 6.2 of the code that the member didn't comply. And that can be a standalone allegation, or it could mean that the sanction, that the member gets a bigger sanction. I'll move on to the second case now, which is a councillor from Merthyr Tydfil, County Borough Council. There were allegations against this councillor, 5 allegations concerning one matter really, his lack of understanding of personal interests that are also prejudicial, and that has led to his breaching the code in terms of declaring the interest, not influencing when you have a prejudicial interest, and not taking part in meetings that you need to leave and so on. And by breaching the code, by doing that, and not declaring this prejudicial interest, that he brings the authority into disrepute, because the member lived next door to a building that was being considered as a home for children. And then the 6th allegation talks about the councillor's treatment of the chief executive and the relationship between them, and the lack of respect. That decision by the Adjudication Panel for Wales, they started the sanction by saying that the councillor should be suspended for 9 months, but they did consider the mitigation points, which is in the sanctions guidance published by the Adjudication Panel for Wales, and the decision in the end was that the member would be suspended temporarily for 7 months. This councillor was the leader of the council at the time as well. And for the member to be suspended for 7 months just shows you how serious the case was and how serious they considered the breaches of the code in terms of all the allegations. Looking at newspapers about this case, you couldn't believe what's been printed in newspapers. It appears that the member intends to appeal. That's what I saw in the newspapers, but I haven't actually seen that that has happened, but we may see that in due course and we will report back to you. So once again, there are learning points for members in this, talking about the Ombudsman's guidance in terms of the Code of Conduct. Attending training on the Code of Conduct and understanding it is important. Attending training is important, but understanding the code is important as well, because obviously this councillor said that he didn't understand the use of the words prejudicial interest when he was being advised. Members are also advised to ask for advice from the monitoring officer about personal and prejudicial interest, and that members also need a good reason for not taking the advice given by the monitoring officer about personal and prejudicial interests. And when members see this sort of case, they might think, well, I have a personal interest and not an interest as a councillor. But there is a way of overcoming that prejudicial interest if the individual is acting in his personal capacity and that the boundary isn't broken between so that the councillor doesn't use his @Ynys email address. He doesn't use his authority's equipment to undertake his own personal discussions. And the briefing note has been written for members about this. And as a result of this case, perhaps we could highlight the content of that briefing note again to remind members of the right way of going around things to undertake or deal with their own personal matters. So just asking you as a committee to note the contents of the report and that we will be including this report and the cases in the newsletter for elected members and town and community councillors following this committee.
That is important because one of the questions we were asking, wasn't it, in meetings with town and community councils regarding the prejudicial interest, if people understood exactly what it meant. And I think we must remind people about this matter. Does anybody have a question for Marad before we note the report? Okay, thank you very much, Marad. The next item, applications for dispensation. Lynn? Yes, sorry, usually at this point in the meeting, we report back to the full committee on any applications for dispensations which have gone to panel from the committee during the period since the last meeting, but we haven't had any applications for dispensation. We have prepared one just foreseeing that there will be an application for a block dispensation quite soon, but the facts behind that haven't developed yet, but we foresee they will. So maybe we'll be asking quite soon to create a panel to do that application for dispensation on behalf of many members, but we're not at that stage yet, but nothing to report in the period that's just gone. Okay, thank you. Item 9, the annual report to council. Lynn, do you want to say anything? Yes, if it's okay with you. By now, this is a report by the Standards Committee once a year to the full council. And there's something statutory under the new Local Government Act. But we as an authority and you as a committee have already been doing this annually anyway. You've taken the report before the council. It's been accepted on the 18th of May. The main elements of the report, of course, are looking at the work which has been achieved during the year, setting a work programme to be achieved for the year to come, and for the council to agree to that programme of work, recognise the statutory requirements, so anything to do with any hearings from the Ombudsman and any dispensations, and then for you as chair of the committee to express an opinion on where the council is in relation to behaviour of elected members. So a kind of annual temperature check. There's nothing further to do at the moment, but just recommend maybe that you're willing to relook at the structure of the report sometime before the next annual meeting. We've just had this annual meeting with Asmine as Cyro for the Audit Committee, and we've tried to concentrate on more data and less narrative, simplifying it, reducing it in length, just because elected members have so much reading work to do and so much work to get through. We wanted to simplify it a little bit for the future maybe, and because now it's something that's statutory in nature, maybe there'll be a number of other authorities out there who have something different, something simpler, and maybe lessons we can learn from them, and obviously willing to do so. So just putting that in the diary as a piece of work to be done if you're okay with that. But apart from that, I don't think there's anything else to add. No, I'm happy to do that. Sharon, your hand is up. It's just a quick question for Lynn. Just thinking that there will be a change in the council during that period. Do you see the reports going to the old council or the new council? The annual report this year has gone to the full council in May, hasn't it? Do you think it'll go to the council in May next year? I think, yes, I think that is the requirement. I think there's a scrutiny one and a democratic services one, and it'll go to the meeting in the morning before the annual meeting usually. So that's the timetable. I was just thinking if it was going to go to the old current council or the new one, there's different opportunities with the new council as well, isn't there? Just to raise awareness and so on. I think, thank you. I think, Rhys, did you have a comment on the annual report? I know Jill had sent a message about a comment she had. Rhys is frozen, I think. Jill had sent a comment regarding the annual report to the council, and I'll read it as it is in English.
To review this report in advance before being presented to the council in May 2021. I know I report on behalf of the Standards Committee, but what's the opinion of the officers on that? There is no reason why we can't share it. I'm happy if you as chair want to do that, and we can put it in the timetable to make sure there's enough time for you to maybe have an opportunity to have an informal meeting to go through the report, maybe. I have no problem with that, but it's my name on the report, so I have to be happy with it. But I have no problem getting input or comments from the members of the committee. Thank you. Okay, so item 10 is then the review of the registers of interest in the town and community councils. That is a lot of work which happened quite recently. And I'll ask for the presentation, and then I want to ask then if it's possible for those members to who took part in the review for their opinion about the review. But I want to thank, first of all, for the newsletter, the excellent newsletter which has been prepared of the general points that were raised. I think that'll be worth sending on as points to be learnt for the town and community councils. So Mared, are you presenting, are you? Thank you. Yes, so this report is before you, and it's the work of a number of months of work from you as a committee. In the last formal meeting in December, you decided that you were going to be conducting these reviews, and a timetable has then been in place to conduct a meeting to choose which councils are going to be reviewed. For this process, 5 names were decided upon in considering such as precepts who had been reviewed previously, and to ensure that 2 councils where 1 clerk was responsible for them, that didn't happen either. So the 5 were chosen and contacted over the phone, first of all, by the Vice Chair of the Standards Committee. Then a formal letter was then sent out to the 5 clerks explaining exactly
the process that was going to be followed and the documentation that needed to be seen during the review as part of this process by the Standards Committee. So there were 5 council which were reviewed. Those meetings have now been conducted during March, April and May. And there were meetings held, and 2 members of the Standards Committee, as well as myself, met with the clerk of each council. And I think yourselves, well, the feedback we got as you as a committee felt that it was a good exercise, but the feedback by the clerks as well was positive, and there was a feeling that they felt that they got some benefit out of that hour or 2 that was spent with them. So the intention with the reviews was to consider matters including their registers of interest as the main issue, the expressions of interest in meetings, and the gifts and benefits, including a number of other issues, and that you came to a conclusion that then was a personal letter going to be sent to each of the 5 councils reviewed. That's not going to be published any further, but just sent to the specific council. And then that a report, a more general report, was then created in order to share any learning points and good practices also that have been recognised during the reviews. And the intention is to share that with the 40 town and community councils. So the personal letters have been prepared on draft form. It's just a matter of agreeing them now so that they can be shared with the councils themselves. And the general findings have been put in a newsletter, which is in Appendix 1 of the report, which is before you today. And if you go to Appendix 1, I won't go through each of the points in the newsletter, but just to draw your attention to the fact this tries to draw the attention to the main headlines, if you like, of what you saw and the themes that came up during the reviews. The only information that I would want to add to what's in the newsletter itself is you'll see on page 1 of Appendix 1, it talks about the Clerks Forum, and there's red text there which says that more details are being collected. I have made further inquiries because if I give the background to that, in many of the reviews, clerks were mentioning they would appreciate and would feel that would be of benefit to them to get some kind of network where they can speak together and talk together and share ideas and good practices, or even just, ask, what am I doing? What are you doing with this? A support network, really, between the clerks. And during one review, one clerk said, there was an organisation which was implementing on this, and there was some type of forum going to be developed. I have contacted those who were named by the clerk, and that isn't quite true. That type of network isn't being developed, so there is no development happening. But I know it's not in your remit to be setting anything like that up, but it is fair that the newsletter does recognise the need the clerks were pointing out, and you just find that you're putting the idea out there, but it's not up to you to push the boat into the water, but just noting that the idea has been raised, and maybe one of the clerks will take the bait to act upon that. But at least the 40 town and community councils are going to know that the need is there if it's in the newsletter. So that box will just need to be adapted, and obviously any other comments from yourself regarding the newsletter. Then, as I say, the idea is that the personal letters are sent out in due course, and that the newsletter and this particular report is sent to the 40 town and community councils. And then what you as a committee have previously said is, during the reviews in 2017 and 2019, is that when the general report was sent out, the committee made an application that the clerks would bring the general newsletter to the attention of the town and community councillors, and that there was a note on the agenda of the meeting to discuss this, and then you as a committee had a report before you in the next meeting noting what councils had conformed with this requirement. So it's up to you as a committee if you intend to do that again. So there are 3 recommendations noted in the report, which is to ask you as a Standards Committee to note the contents of the report in enclosure 1, the newsletter itself in a way, and then ask if you're happy for that enclosure to be sent to all town and community councils, and the cover of the correspondence included as enclosure 2, and with a request for the report to be discussed at a town community council meeting, and for the minutes to be forwarded to the Standard Committee. And then 5.3, that a further report be produced in readiness for the next Standards Committee, detailing the responses received to the request in 4.1, in line with that request. Thank you, Mared. Before we consider the recommendations, and I'm sure we will accept them, but I would just like a taste of the experience of those members who were linked to these reviews, just to get an idea in a way, because in 2 years maybe we'll be looking at this differently anyway, but I think it's important that we express our opinion. Sharon, your hand is up. Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank the officers really for the way the whole process has been established and run. I felt it was very professional, the way that we were directed through the process and the training that we received, and also the support specifically that myself received and the community council that I was part of received from Mared, and thank you to Mared for that. I think the advice and the support we've had throughout the process has been exceptionally good, to be honest. And also the summarising, I don't think summarising that type of meeting, the minutes of that type of meeting is easy. The process that I went through was, I thought the meeting with that support went quite straightforward, to be honest. I thought it was very relaxing, and I think the advice we had to do it in that way was the reason for that. And thank you to whoever's put the report together, because congratulations again. The main points there are very good, but just thank you to the officers for the process, and hope that the town and community councils will have seen a value in the process as well. It would be very interesting to see what their response is. Not their formal response maybe, but their true response, if you like. Thank you, Sharon. Keith?
Yes, it was good to see that, certainly with the council that I was involved in, that there was a reasonably new clerk, as there's been several reasonable new clerks on the island in recent times, and that's the amount of knowledge that was there, and the activities were taken within the code of conduct we found was excellent, and even down to the registers. So there is a view out there that's that clerks are looking to move forward with regards to the Local Government Act, and are reflecting this in what we did find. Yes, we did. We were able to direct in cases where that direction was needed, and we look forward to seeing if those directions have been taken. But I found that certainly in my case it was a case that there was a lot more done than expected to be done, and this seems to be the view across a number of the councils across the island now. So just to bring that to the table, Chair.
Keith.
Thank you, Keith. Rhys? Yeah, thank you. I just have to apologise. I disappeared from the meeting for 15 minutes. I don't know what happened with internet. Let me get down, I think. I just add to what Sharon was said about the support we had from the officers and Mared, especially during the meeting and the arrangements before the meeting. It was excellent. I'd like to thank the town and community councils for the welcome that we received. They are an important part of local democracy, and I'm very proud that and we've been speaking to each other, and hopefully we've been able to help each other as well. And I think they were keen on the whole to strengthen their processes. And the most difficult point, I think, which came over was the training. They are volunteers and they're very aware, the clerks, of the time of their members. And I think that's one of the problems we have to overcome somehow, is to emphasise that training is of benefit to everyone, to local democracy and the members themselves, to look after their own needs and to make sure they don't break any code of conduct or anything. But a positive experience on the whole, I would say. Yes, I would agree with what I've heard. I think what was of interest to me is the way that they had coped with the virtual age, with a lockdown, that the community councils, each one we visited, had used Zoom effectively, that the clerk was confident in the use of the technology, and that there was one town council had even provided laptops for members who were not able, who didn't have laptops at home, and enabled the public also to come in and listen to meetings and discussions that they were having. So that was very good to see. And I would add to what Rhys was saying. I think one challenge with a new act is training, of course, and the way that training is provided for councillors and clerks, and maybe we'll have to just keep an eye on that. But no, I'm very grateful to Mared for the comprehensive report, and I'm sure it will be of benefit to the town and community councils. And if you remember also, we have offered the clerks and chairs that we did visit that we are also willing to discuss further if they wish. So we're trying to be flexible and proactive, because we are here to try and ensure that democracy is successful, and hopefully that there's a new generation of councillors coming following the next election. So I am very grateful and thankful. Sharon, your hand is up. Is that a new hand? Oh, sorry, that's fine. The virtual hands are complicating things at times, don't they? So I'm not sure if anyone wants to make any other comments, David or Arwell, about the report. No, just agree with what everyone else has said, and thank you to Mared for all the work she's done for over the last few months to put everything together. Thank you very much. Yes, I've got nothing else to add either. Okay, can we therefore go to the recommendations? I won't go through them. There are 3 recommendations. Are we ready to accept them, are we? No one objects, do they? No? Okay, thank you for all your work as well, Marad. Item 11, the revised guidance by the Public Services Ombudsman for Wales on the Members' Code of Conduct. Lynn, is this, yes? Yes, thank you. Yes, there's not much to say here. You'll remember that we've had a meeting to go through the questions on the consultation from the Ombudsman Office regarding the new guidelines on the code. Those were agreed upon, and the guidelines themselves, the final ones, have now arrived. There are no changes, significant changes, and nothing specific which comes up from the responses of the Standards Committee. I don't think they've made much changes at all to the original version anyway, so take it that there are 22 Standards Committee in Wales, or more than that, who have responded, and no purpose to that response, really, in my opinion. So this has been accepted as it is. I'm not sure if there'll be further changes after Richard Penn has looked at the code, but at the moment, these are the guidelines, the current guidelines. And just ask you to agree to the second and third recommendation in the paper is to consider the amended guidelines as the, and also that we change the briefing note just to reflect the new guidelines. Thank you very much. Does anybody want to make any comment? Thank you, Rhys. Yes, thank you, Lynn. I'll just ask, it sounds like you're a bit, I'm not sure, is disappointed or what about the lack of feedback or lack of attention that the Ombudsman has taken of the feedback he's received. Is that correct? Or do you accept that that's how these things work? No, I think the best way to do this would be to conduct a consultation before writing the new guidance and then prepare the draft. I think they should have consulted beforehand, but they didn't leave enough time for themselves to be able to consider more than 22 responses from local authorities, and they were working within a timetable which had been set by the Welsh Government Ombudsman, so there wasn't enough time to do it meaningful way. So I do think we have wasted a bit of time, to be honest, and each Standards Committee has done the same thing, I take it. But maybe some of the things we've raised there will be useful for the next conversation that we'll have in relation to the code. Yes, disappointing with the response, as far as I'm concerned, with the input that after the input the Standards Committee gave, and I think there should be some kind of recognition to everyone who's given this attention. But there we go. You'll see the recommendations there in the report. Are you ready to accept those? Thank you. And the final item, a report on distribution of the newsletter in the town and community councils. Marad, yes? Yes. Following the last meeting in December, you as a committee decided, rather than emails, maybe long emails going out, or a number of smaller emails being sent to the town and community councils and elected members, that the process would be from now on that a newsletter is created, and that then includes all the matters that you as a committee would have discussed in your formal meetings. And the decision you made was, following the December 2020 meeting that a newsletter would be sent out, and it was sent out to elected members, and another was sent out to the town and community councils. When the newsletter was sent to the town and community councils, an application was made with the newsletter to ask the clerks to bring the newsletters to the attention of the councils by including it as an item on the agenda of the council in their next meeting. The newsletter was sent to all town and community councils on the 4th of March, and it asked for responses to that request that included it on the agenda, and noted that the Standards Committee would receive a report on the responses that had or hadn't been received by the next formal meeting of the Standards Committee in June. In Appendix 1 of this report, you'll see a copy of the email which was sent, and in Appendix 2 you'll see the list of the town and community councils in Anglesey, and there's a note, or it shows you how many responses we've received. A total of 9 town and community councils have responded to the application as things stand today. That, of course, doesn't mean that the town and community councils aren't aware of the newsletters, but what it just shows is that we haven't received a response confirming that the newsletters have been brought to the attention in line with the request by the Standards Committee. So what we're just asking you as a committee is to note this information, that 9 of 40 town and community councils have responded. And do you want to take any steps at all regarding those town and community councils who haven't responded, or are you going to just leave the matter there? So we just want a decision as a Standards Committee. What do you want to do following receiving that information in this report? Rhys, there is a response from Kellen Edwards as well, and I'll just bring that to your attention after. Thank you, John. I just want to ask, Jill had also, we weren't able to open the responses we had from the 9 councils. Can you give us just an idea of what the responses were? It's just confirmation in a way of the minutes where the town and community councils have discussed the matters. In most cases, it doesn't go any further than just noting it, that it has been discussed. I can, if you can't open the documentation, I can make sure that we do look at that following this meeting, just to make sure what we can do to make sure that you can see that feedback in its, just so that you can see it. If I could just go on, John. What Jill suggests, and I'll read it in English.
Emphasising how keen we are to support and help them, and that their feedback, etc., on our newsletters would be helpful.
And I think that is quite a good idea. Yes, Kellen Edwards also states the same. David, have you got any comment?
Yeah.
My hand was up for a while and I've got the same comment. It is disappointing that only 9 have responded, but if we could resend it, I'm sure many more responses will come in relation to the newsletter. Sharon? Yes, I agree with what everyone has said, but there is a sensitive balance to be had here from being a committee that just, you know, you've done this, you haven't done that, and the people just say, oh, here they are again, pestering us and being supportive. And I find that's a difficult balance to be struck. But I think what would a businessman do? And if we were clever, we'd probably try and put something in the newsletter which is enough bait for them, if you like, so that they want to respond to us. I'm not sure what exactly, but I'll think. But something that makes them think, oh yes, we want to tell them that, or we want to respond to that, so that we then know that they've discussed it or read it because they've discussed that particular item included in the newsletter. Psychology, maybe. I'm not sure what, but I think we might just need to be a little bit more clever than just sending a letter saying naughty for not sending that back. I wouldn't send a letter like that, but that's my view. Yeah, I take the point. Arwell? Yes, I'm also disappointed that only 9 have responded. I've just got a question, which steps could we take? I'm just looking at the list here. Holyhead, Beaumaris, Amlwch. Big areas where there are clerks, where I take it are paid. How Holyhead, definitely a former member. I'm a former member of Holyhead. It's quite a big council. I'm quite disappointed that there's been no response from there. But what steps could we take? Yes, thank you, Arwell. That's a big question, but we have to think about it, I think, seriously. How do we go after this? As Sharon says, we don't want to be a nuisance to these people. What we want to do is help and assist these people and committees. And we'll have a further conversation about that, I think. But I think for now, because is this the first time we've asked for this type of response? Is it, Mared? Yes, this is the first time you've asked regarding the newsletter, because the first newsletter went out. But for you as a committee, it's something that the Standards Committee have been doing previously, is asking for feedback when sending things. And I would say it's a pattern, really, which has become apparent that there's a lot of failure to respond to different things. I think what Sharon Warnes, has said, you do have to get to a point and say, well, we've tried our best. There's no point really going on about it. You will be sending another newsletter. Another newsletter will be prepared following this meeting. And rather than maybe putting a separate note about the previous newsletter, if you like, maybe the new newsletter can refer to the fact that you are drawing attention to it in a way. That's a different option, maybe, to writing to the 31 who haven't responded, saying you haven't responded. So maybe that's another option possibly you could think of. Lynn? Yes, just to think of one thing. When you do the audit work with the town and community councils, you set some principles about who you're going to see and what the reasoning is behind that. I think maybe the town and community councils who respond consistently, and that they are the same ones who respond consistently, we know who are going to work with us and who's not. Maybe there's a way of making it clear and not threatening. We have to be quite subtle about it, but make it clear to them what we will be looking at as the type of principles before doing this research work again. And there is a possibility as well that you want to do this next year and not the county council, because the members will be new ones, so it won't be much for you to look at. So maybe if you are going to revisit this next year, those who don't respond consistently won't respond. That could be a reason for you to go to those particular community councils. Yes, that's a fair idea. Rhys? I think, in principle, I'm very supportive of the newsletter idea, because you could just you can read it as a newsletter, but there's lots of information behind it as well if you follow the links. So I think they should be able to deal with it, and it would nice to have a response to make sure that they are agreeing with our opinion as a standards committee that the newsletter is worth receiving. Sorry, Sharon. Could we ask them what would they like to see in the newsletter next time, maybe? Is there something specific you would want us to present or include in the newsletter? Could we ask that? Thank you. Well, we've had suggestions there, very useful suggestions. Definitely, I agree with Lynn. Maybe those who don't respond, we could try and go and see those in the new year. And as you say, because there are new councillors, maybe it could be a light touch thing there, that we concentrate on the community councils. We can't discuss that, but I think we've had, from what I hear, we are all supportive of this type and this way of presenting information. It's information which is useful as far as I'm concerned and should be of use to town and community councils. But I think just stick to it, I think, and adapt maybe the way we go around things. But that these meetings are very important as far as we're concerned, and I think as far as town and community councils are concerned. So are we all in agreement with that as a way forward, and that we accept the recommendations in the report? And I think we'll therefore have a conversation about this again in due course. So I think that is it, the end of the meeting. I'm very grateful for you all for attending, and the officers especially for supporting and for being of as much assistance. I can't finish without wishing Mared well. This is her last official meeting looking after us. Best wishes to you in future, Mared. I know there will be informal meetings and so on, but it would be discourteous of me not to thank you formally during this committee. Thank you very much for your hard work, Mared, and best wishes. And best wishes to everyone else as well. And thank you for your contributions and attendance. Thank you.